Welcome to State of Wellbeing, a podcast from South Dakota State University. The State of Wellbeing is a holistic well-being podcast with the goal of supporting the campus community as we strive to be a growing, high-performing, and healthy university.
Welcome to the State of Wellbeing podcast. My name is Kevin Sackreiter. I serve as the Executive Director for the Center for Professional Enrichment and Teaching Excellence here at SDSU. And it's my privilege to be able to have some conversations today with a couple phenomenal guests as we talk about the topic of communicating with faculty and self-advocacy on behalf of students and their own self-advocacy. I'm excited to start our conversation today with Madison Hodgdon from the Wintrode Center here at South Dakota State University. It's nice to have you today, Madison.
Yeah, thank you.
So why don't we start our conversation by having you tell us a little bit about yourself and your different roles here at South Dakota State.
Sure. Yeah, so like you said, my name's Madison, and I currently work at the Wintrode Student Success and Opportunity Center. I am a graduate assistant there, and I specifically work with the tutoring and SI program. So I do a lot of work with training the tutors and SI leaders as well.
And as a graduate assistant within that role, you also have some student responsibilities, I assume, as well.
Yep. So, and I guess I should say I got my undergraduate degree here in human biology, and then now I'm working on my master's in public health.
Okay, excellent. So let's start there. Thinking about your role as a student and reflecting on when you were a student, did you have any concerns or apprehensions as related to communicating with faculty members and maybe even the secondary topic of self-advocacy and advocating for yourself to those faculty and staff?
Yeah. So I think initially for a lot of students it might be kind of scary introducing yourself to somebody for the first time and definitely advocating for yourself as well, because coming from high school, especially as a freshman, you might have had your parents there to do it for you. And so this may be something they've never had to do before. And I think sometimes students think that their professors may be hard to talk to, or that they don't have time, or maybe they won't believe them or take their concerns seriously. And I don't think that's the case at all. Teachers have time set aside for students to come in, and they do want to get to know you and help you succeed.
I'm curious if as a student you had any specific experiences where you maybe had to have a conversation with a faculty member and you were like, oh my gosh, how do I go about doing this?
Yeah, I guess so. Maybe more specifically as a graduate student,
Sure.
I guess I can be kind of personal here. I've definitely struggled with mental health, more specifically in grad school. And I guess at some points it was bad enough that I did have teachers reach out, and I kind of did have to take that step to actually contact them back and advocate for myself a little bit and say, like, hey, here's what's going on.
Well, thank you for being willing to share that. Along those lines then, as you worked through those opportunities to communicate or self-advocate to faculty, what strategies or tips did you find that were really helpful?
I think just being honest with them, and they're people too, so just have a conversation like you would with anyone else. They understand that we're a human. We all have things that we're going through outside of school, and so I guess just remember that and just have a conversation with them.
Yeah, no, I like that. I think that idea of humanness, that faculty, no matter what degree they may have or what their role may be, they're just like you.
Yeah,
and I think want to have communication and want to help students be successful at the university. So what frustrates you when you're communicating with faculty within your graduate student role, probably more specifically? And we could expand that to as you work with undergraduate students in your role with Wintrode. What do you sense frustrates them when it comes to communicating with faculty or self-advocating?
Yeah, I think sometimes students may feel that they won't be heard or maybe understood when they're talking to professors. I think that's been something I've heard about a little bit.
I wonder if I could ask a second question.
Yeah,
not to interrupt you, but
no.
a thought came to mind. As you have that opportunity to talk with students, because we have faculty who are listening to this podcast as well.
Yeah.
Are there things that they may do that frustrates when you talk about students getting frustrated or feeling unheard?
Mm-hmm.
Are there communication things that might be going on from a faculty perspective that might be communicating that to the student?
I guess, I don't know, maybe even just from the beginning, I know they usually post on D2L to like introduce themselves, but maybe really encouraging students to come in right away at the beginning of the semester to kind of start building that relationship with students. Start that relationship from the beginning, and then if you do have to have a conversation regarding self-advocacy later on, I think that would make that conversation a little bit easier.
I love that idea of setting, I would call it setting culture in classrooms. Yeah. And I think that idea of creating a culture that's supportive right from the start
right.
Is a value to faculty members, but I think is valued by students as well. And I think if they feel comfortable within a learning environment, I think it makes, I would hope, it makes that communication a little bit easier.
Right.
Yeah, okay. Let's go on to the next question then, because I think that's kind of a natural place for us to go. And it really, and we've touched on this a little bit, I think, when we talked about, creating some culture and that sort of thing. But what tips do you have for students about effective self-advocacy and or communication that you feel might be of great value as they engage with faculty?
I think it's important to remember that, I think we kind of already talked about it, but professors do care about your well-being and your success in their class. And they do want to get to know you. We've kind of talked about that. But I think, again, kind of going back to the beginning of the semester, if you can, maybe just even sending an email to your professor, introducing yourself, would be a great way to get that relationship started. And I think maybe some freshmen wouldn't be comfortable going in to visit a professor necessarily in their office straight off the bat, which that's okay. Maybe you could start with the email, and maybe that would get things going enough that you would feel comfortable later on going in and having a face-to-face conversation, and then set you up for success again if you have to have some sort of self-advocacy conversation.
I love that strategy of letting people know who you are.
Yeah.
My daughter's in high school, but I've kind of talked to her about a very similar idea of going proactively and having conversations with her teachers.
Yeah.
And I think at the university setting, that idea of being proactive and engaging faculty is kind of what we're here to talk about today, is how do we do that? How do you do that more effectively? And so I love that idea of that proactive email or going up after class and just introducing yourself so that you are more than just a body in a chair, but you put a name and a face to that individual.
Sure.
I like that a lot. Were there any other ideas that you maybe wanted to share related to this?
Yeah, I think even just students getting involved in organizations or in clubs on campus, I think that just helps them grow as a person and develop some of those communication skills or other skills that will be helpful in building a relationship with their faculty or the professors. And then again, hopefully setting them up for success with some of those harder conversations that they may need to have with the professor.
Right. That idea of getting involved and making those is a great way of making those connections. I love that. I think that's a phenomenal strategy. Well, it looks like we're up against kind of our 10 minutes that we were going to try to set aside, but I really do want to thank you, Madison, for joining us today, for being a part of this conversation. I think the ideas that you've shared are really valuable, and I know maybe this is a good opportunity to put a plug in for the support students can get at the Wintrode Center as we wrap up.
Yeah, we've got tutoring, we have SI, we also have success advisors available to any students if they'd like to use that as a resource as well. So come check us out. We're in Wagner, and we'd love to see you.
Brand new facility.
Yep, new building. So.
Well, thank you so much, Madison.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kevin.
Well, the second part of our conversation in our State of Wellbeing podcast, I'm really excited to welcome Dr. Andrea Carlile, an assistant professor in our School of Communication Studies and Journalism, and also our director of forensics here at South Dakota State University, coming off a great performance by her team at the AFA NIET National Tournament. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. It was a really great season and cool to see that we can make history in a program that has been around since our second course catalog.
That's a phenomenal statistic right there. I love that. I love that point of information. So, Andrea, today we're talking about students communicating with their faculty members and also self-advocating.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons I really wanted to have this conversation with you is your role as the coordinator of the SpeechComm 101 course here on campus and working with lots of graduate students and really having a touch point with every undergraduate student at South Dakota State. And so what I thought we'd maybe start with is having you reflect a little bit on your role as a faculty member and talking to us about just in general, how do you prioritize student to faculty communication?
Yeah, absolutely. I think my approach as an educator, either as a coach, a mentor of graduate students, or in the classroom and overseeing Foundations of Communication Speech 101 is very student-centered, right? Our students are why we are here. And even though I think sometimes students think having to take Speech 101 is a very cruel and unusual punishment, it really is about their success. And so for me, it is about finding ways to connect to students. So as an instructor, I want to know your name. I want to know where you're from. I want to know something that excites you. And maybe when you're 18 or 19, you didn't think a college professor was going to care about you in that way. And I think my role as the coordinator of 101 is to help debunk that myth that people come into college with all of these expectations that they think no one's going to care about you if you come to class. But that is, I think, the opposite of the culture that we embrace here at South Dakota State, especially in Foundations of Communication. And so finding ways to connect with our students. At this point, having been at SDSU for over a decade, I might not know your name right away, but I could probably tell you where you're from or what you've studied or something about you. And I think finding ways as a faculty member, even though you might have hundreds of students in an academic year, to find ways to have that personal connection is really, really important. And so for me, the work that I do is all about the students, right? If it weren't for the students, I wouldn't have the opportunity to do my work. And I say that, too, because my role coming into SDSU was very focused at an instructional level. And when I work with graduate teaching assistants, we spend the first whole 2 days of our training talking about building a classroom community and how our work teaching public speaking and foundations of communication is so much more than those foundational skills, but also helping students feel comfortable and acclimated at the university setting.
So let's pivot on that, because I think you did a really good job of kind of sharing that philosophical perspective on the idea of communicating and self-advocacy. But now putting yourself kind of in the role of the students, and if you were in that role, what suggestions do you have for students about opening up those lines of communication with faculty?
Absolutely. So I know it is really vulnerable for our students to say, hey, I'm struggling, especially if they were someone who was a high performer or they just never experienced maybe that kind of challenge in their educational environment before. But I think the thing I tell students all the time is that I don't know what I don't know. And so I can't help you until you tell me how I can help you. So say you haven't come to class for a couple of weeks, right? I might have something I'll ping your advisor and connect state and we don't hear anything. I might think that you just don't care. But maybe there's something more going on. And so find those ways to connect with your advisor if that's who you feel comfortable with, or connect to your 101 instructor if that's who you feel comfortable with. Find those touch points to know that we're here to help you and we're here to advocate for you in your role as a student.
I love that. And so I'm going to pivot again.
Yeah.
And this time from general communication, the idea of self-advocacy. If a student identifies that they have a real learning need, or maybe they're struggling with something in their lives right now, how do you suggest students go about advocating for themselves with faculty at SDSU?
Absolutely. And I think that is hard. Like I said, that vulnerability that requires a student to admit, oh my gosh, this is hard. And so I think, admitting that I need to get help is the first thing to do. And then the next thing is to find that person who you feel comfortable with. So a lot of times our 101 instructors are that person who helps become an advocate for their students. I can think of several examples from the semester where myself, the instructor, we come up with a game plan. We reach out to their advisor. Maybe we connect with Nancy in the Office of Access and Disability to get the student an accommodation that they need in the classroom. And I think the biggest thing for students to know is that, yes, you have to make that first step to say, I need help. But from there, you're not alone, right? There's a whole team of people to help you find a way for you to be successful, because we want every student at South Dakota State to be able to be successful. And, when I think about that Foundations of Communication class, it is a scary class for a lot of folks, right? I know that giving a speech in front of a classroom of folks is really vulnerable and scary. But our philosophy is that we don't want that general education class to be the reason that you can't be a successful college student. So find that trusted advisor. Maybe even it's your roommate who has to help you find that resource, or it's your CA, right? There's someone on campus who will be an ally to you to help you find that team of people who are going to be there to help you. And I hope that in many cases that's a 101 speech instructor, but maybe it's your advisor, maybe it's your CA, and maybe it's even Nancy or someone in Shelley Bear's office, in the Office of Multicultural Affairs. And I'm probably getting that name wrong as we've done some reorganization. But OMA, I think, is what folks colloquially refer to that as.
You know what I think's so great is you use the term "we" a lot. And as I get the opportunity to engage with faculty and staff here at South Dakota State University, I think that idea of we might not always know the answer. If you come to a faculty member or a staff member and you are advocating for a need that you may have, we might not know the answer, but I think oftentimes we know a pathway to get you to the answer. At least that's been my experience. I don't know about yours, but I feel like everyone here is willing to advocate on behalf of our students.
Absolutely. And that's exactly it, right? I might not have the answer right away, but maybe it's calling Toby Euchre or reaching out to him in the Dean of Students office, or reaching out to Jody Owens and the student advising, right? There's someone somewhere who's going to have the answer. And if we don't have the answer, we're going to work together to find a solution to help that student be their best selves, right? And sometimes that might be withdrawing for the semester or dropping a class. But I think a lot of students come in with this all or nothing, that, right, I've got to get passing grades every semester, but it's okay to drop a class, right? It's okay to do what you need to do to be successful. And I think realizing that self-advocacy might start with you, but it doesn't end in isolation.
I love that you're kind of a walking directory of resources, Andrea,
Yeah.
listing them off. That's great. And I think that's the idea, that many of us know lots of different outlets or pathways, and we can help you get there. So what frustrates you as a faculty member about student-to-faculty communication?
Yeah, so to me, what frustrates me is when they don't communicate, right? Like I said, I don't know how I can help you or how I'm supposed to even be helping you if you aren't communicating how I can be an ally to you. I even, I coach a team of about 15 students at the university of our speech and debate team. And even we have that, I remind them that often too, right? They might not be showing up for practice on time, or maybe not getting the revisions done. And they might have something else going on in their life, but they haven't told me, right? Because somehow they think by telling me that they aren't meeting those deadlines that they're letting me down. But I would tell students that you're actually letting us down when you don't let us know what's going on. And so not communicating is like bad moves, right? I think that shows, even my TAs will say that, the student, I haven't heard from them in 5 weeks, and then all of a sudden now midterm deficiencies went out, and now I'm hearing from them, right? At a certain point, we can't redirect you to be successful in that semester. And so talk, right? Talk to somebody, send an email. Even if you're having a crummy day and you can't get out of bed for whatever reason, email your professor. Proof of life is really important for your professors, whether they're a graduate teaching assistant or a full professor. Just letting them know what's going on is going to be your best ally.
I'm glad you added on the late communication frustration.
Yeah.
We're well down the road, and then I finally hear from you. I think that can be very frustrating. I think that's better than none at all.
Absolutely.
But understanding that sometimes late communication doesn't always have the pathway when it comes to grades and missed work and those sort of things. Maybe it doesn't have the pathway as easily as early, honest, open lines of communication with your faculty.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think about that even in our Foundations of Communication class, that if you aren't feeling well and it's a speech day, email your professor before you give your before you're supposed to give your speech. If you wait 2 weeks and say, I was sick, that's going to be a harder hurdle to overcome, right? At a certain point, I'm going to ask you for more documentation of those sorts of things about why you were sick, why you weren't in class, than if you were just honest that you weren't feeling well, or maybe you needed an extension, right? We're always going to be on your side. And yeah, that late communication is helpful, but not as helpful as that being open and honest up front.
Right. So you've talked a lot about graduate teaching assistants and your role kind of overseeing the a large number of graduate teaching assistants within the SpeechComm 101 world. And so I'm wondering if there are any differences that you've identified for students to be aware of as they communicate with graduate teaching assistants versus faculty.
You know, I actually don't think that there is a significant difference. For those who are graduate teaching assistants in our unit, they're the instructor of record, and I'm always going to be on their side. Yes, they have a standardized course that I oversee, but they're the front lines, and I'm going to defer to them because they have firsthand knowledge of student behavior, student issues, classroom engagement that I don't have, right? I'm only in classrooms sporadically throughout the semester, and so I don't think that there really is any difference. I think sometimes students, maybe once they realize they've got a GTA, they think that they can maybe take advantage of them or think that they won't be as strict, but that's not the case, right? I'm always going to err on the side of my GTA, right? And I always joke with students, right, if they have to have a meeting with me, things have probably gone wrong, right? Like I would rather meet students in a positive setting, but I'm always going to default to our instructors because they are instructors of record and they go through a relatively rigorous training before we put them in the classroom, and we have weekly teaching team meetings, and so they are the folks who are on the front lines. And yes, right, if there is a big issue that they can't solve, I'm there to help them. But students shouldn't treat their GTAs any different, especially if they are the one that they only see in the classroom. Certainly in a lab setting, that might be different or might feel different, but your lab GTA is the one giving the grades, right? Like they're doing the reporting to whoever that overseeing faculty member is. So they're the people who you've got to be open and honest with, probably more so than maybe a professor who oversees that course, because they're on the front lines, to use that metaphor.
No, I love that. I think that's such a great way of kind of wrapping us up and bringing us home here a little bit. But before we do that, any final thoughts that you wanted to share with our students as it relates to that idea of self-advocating and just ultimately communicating with their faculty members?
Yeah, well, I think for our students here at SDSU and kind of building off Madison, right, there are so many resources for you to help learn how to self-advocate. Wintrode's a great example. Even in Foundations of Communication, we have a speech center to allow students to get extra credit, but also hone their skills if they're nervous about an assignment. And so it's really about finding who you think can be a trusted ally to help you on that path for self-advocacy.
Well, thank you so much, Andrea, for joining us today. Madison, I want to thank you as well. This has been a really great conversation, and I've enjoyed hearing the different perspectives and thoughts on how the students at South Dakota State University can advocate for their own learning and emotional needs, and also just to open up those lines of communication with faculty. So on behalf of our guests today, I just want to thank everyone for joining us on our State of Wellbeing podcast.
Thank you for listening to this episode of State of Wellbeing, a podcast from South Dakota State University. This podcast is brought to you by the Mental Wellbeing Team and SD State Health.